Hello and welcome to another episode of Study Sessions. My name, of course, is Mr. Boff, and in today's episode, we are looking at the character of Jack Merridew in William Golding's Lord of the Flies. Now, we know that Jack is more than just a boy on a desert island. He is a deeply allegorical figure who represents many of the novel's darkest themes. Golding uses Jack's journey from choir leader to savage tyrant to explore humanity's capacity for barbarism and the fragile veneer of civilization. In particular, Jack is the embodiment, the personification of primal savagery, our innate violent instincts that emerge when societal rules fall away. He also embodies that thirst for power, the tyrant or dictatorial thirst for power that we see throughout leaders of the 20th century, that obsession with control and dominance, as Jack indeed increasingly seeks to rule the other boys, rule with fear and rule with terror. And then finally, he embodies the breakdown of order itself, the collapse of civilized norms and structures under fear, the rule of anarchy, for which, of course, Jack is a serious catalyst. It is through Jack's transformation that Golding allegorically depicts how quickly civilized order can erode, and how readily a child, and therefore by extension any human, can revert to primitive behavior when law and reason are abandoned. In this episode, I'm going to trace Jack's character arc in chapter order, looking at key quotations from chapter 1 all the way through to the final chapter, chapter 12, and analyze his descent into savagery and, of course, its broader thematic significance. So, as I said, chapter 1, and we've got the introduction of Jack as choir leader. Now, Jack first appears leading his choir in a military-style march along the beach. Golding immediately emphasizes Jack's natural authority. He's introduced famously as the boy who controlled them, with the black-clad choir boys moving in lockstep under his command. From a distance, the group looks eerily inhuman. Quote, "Then the creature stepped from mirage onto clear sand. The creature was a party of boys." Now, referring to the marching boys as a creature hints at the sinister, almost, dare I say it, beast-like potential of their collective. Even at this early moment, Golding suggests that Jack's leadership strips the choir of individuality, foreshadowing how a mob under a dictatorial leader can become a single, frightening entity. It is the foreshadowing of the de-individuation to come. Up close, Jack is characterized by an air of confident superiority. When the stranded boys realize they ought to choose a chief, Jack immediately asserts, "I ought to be chief," and Golding pointedly notes it is said with simple arrogance. In Jack's mind, his entitlement to leadership is obvious. He cites his civilized credentials. "Because I'm chapter chorister, boy, I can sing C sharp." These qualifications, being the lead chorister and head boy, reflect how Jack initially clings to the hierarchical structure of the civilized world. He believes authority is his by right of prior status. Now, ironically, almost comically, skills like singing C sharp have little relevance on a deserted island, and yet Jack wields them to try to claim power. Golding is subtly satirizing here the arbitrary nature of social titles. Jack's leadership instinct is clear, but his rationale for it is naive, rooted in the world of schoolboy honours that is, of course, already fading. Jack's forceful confidence is so evident that even without good reasons, many boys feel he was the most obvious leader. This sets the stage for an eventual power struggle between Jack and Ralph, whose authority comes not from arrogance, but from the symbolic conch and a more democratic appeal. We're going to stay in chapter 1, and we're thinking about the first blood in the book and Jack's initial hesitation. So despite his aggressive posturing, Jack's first encounter with killing exposes the lingering influence of civilization upon him. In the final scene of chapter 1, Jack, Ralph, and Simon come upon a trapped piglet. Jack raises his knife to kill the pig, but at this stage of the book, he cannot go through with it. The narration reveals a reason in very striking terms. Quote, "They knew very well why he hadn't, because of the enormity of the knife descending and cutting into living flesh, because of the unbearable blood." Jack's hand is stayed or paused by the moral horror or the enormity of taking life and the visceral repulsion at gore. In this moment, Jack is still restrained by the taboo of murder that civilized society has instilled in him. The phrase unbearable blood suggests a physical and a psychological aversion. He cannot yet bear the reality of violence. Now, embarrassed by his hesitation, Jack vows that next time there would be no mercy, slamming his knife into a tree. This vow is chilling. It marks a very early turning point where Jack consciously determines to overcome and disregard his civilized inhibitions. Golding uses this aborted kill to foreshadow Jack's evolution, or we might more accurately say devolution, from a boy momentarily afraid of blood to one who will eventually revel and glory and luxuriate in slaughter. This scene underscores a central idea. Savagery is learned. Jack must teach himself, on some level, to shed his civilized qualms, his civilized inhibitions. It is, in some ways, a conscious choice on his part, and chapter 1 shows the first crack in his rather thin and flimsy moral armor. Okay, chapter 2, Jack's irony. We're not savages. It is in chapter 2 that Jack, at least initially, appears to support Ralph's attempts at establishing order. At an early assembly, Jack takes the conch and passionately agrees to the need for rules, declaring, quote, "We've got to have rules and obey them. After all, we're not savages, we're English, and the English are best at everything. So we've got to do the right things." This statement drips with irony. Jack claims the mantle of civility, insisting they uphold rules and do the right things, even as the seeds of savagery are already growing in him. His remark, "We're not savages," is infamously ironic because Jack himself will become the lead savage on the island. The mention of being English and therefore superior at everything also highlights Golding's broad critique of imperialist and nationalist pride. Jack invokes his cultural identity as a source of pride and supposed moral high ground, echoing the attitudes of British colonial civility. And yet Golding will show that no national or cultural identity is immune to mankind's primitive and essential darkness. Jack's pronouncement here illustrates how at this point he still wears the veneer of civility and propriety. He knows what ought to be said. But as the novel progresses, Jack will utterly abandon these principles. The conch, symbol of orderly discourse, will come to mean nothing to him. Thus, chapter 2 sets up Jack's hypocrisy. He pays lip service to civilized rules and roles, even volunteering his choir as hunters to help maintain the signal fire, but the thrill of power and bloodshed is already tugging at him beneath the surface. Golding uses this scene to underscore the fragility of civility and civilization. The very boy who insists we're not savages will prove how quickly savagery can take over. On to chapter 3, the hunter emerges. By chapter 3, Jack's transformation is well underway. He becomes obsessed with hunting, to the detriment of all else. Golding's description of Jack in the jungle shows how far he's strayed from the prim, civilized choir boy of chapter 1. Quote, "Jack was bent double, his nose only a few inches from the humid earth. Then, dog-like, uncomfortably on all fours, he stole forward." Jack is literally on all fours, moving dog-like through the undergrowth. This image of him sniffing the ground for pig tracks paints Jack as more animal than boy. He's removed his school uniform, wears only tattered shorts, and carries a sharpened stick, a primitive hunter in body and posture. Golding even notes Jack's eyes are bolting and nearly mad with frustration, emphasizing the insane intensity of his new primal identity. When Jack returns unsuccessful from the hunt, he struggles to articulate what's happening inside him. He tells Ralph, "I went on. I had to go on. And then he tried to convey the compulsion to track down and kill that was swallowing him up." The word here, compulsion, is key. This is ripe for word level analysis. Jack feels an irresistible urge to hunt and kill, as if it were some dark force overtaking his being, the blackness that spreads, we might say, from later on in the novel. It swallows him up, suggesting that Jack is being consumed by a darker instinct he himself does not fully understand. His attempt to explain falls short. He trails off, then admits, "I thought I might kill," with madness in his eyes. This moment of inarticulate passion shows that Jack's priorities have fundamentally shifted. Meat and the act of hunting enthrall him far more than building shelters or keeping the fire going, which of course Ralph prioritizes. The conflict between Jack and Ralph here is not just a personal one. It is allegorical, it is ideological. Ralph represents rationality, cooperation, long-term thinking, the long-term thinking of rescue plans. Jack, on the other hand, is increasingly linked with primitive, instinctive gratification, the hunt, the feast, and also immediate power. So chapter 3 reveals how far Jack's savagery has already progressed. He's developing the mindset of a predator, and the civilizing mission of rescue is fading from his concerns. The stage is set for Jack to break from Ralph's leadership as his compulsion for bloodlust grows. Chapter 4 marks another critical turning point for Jack's character with the introduction of face paint. Jack discovers that painting his face for hunting liberates him from his former self. He uses clay and charcoal to create a form of hunting mask, and the effect is transformational. We're not just talking about camouflage. Looking at his reflection, Jack is astonished to see no longer himself, but an awesome stranger. The painted face allows Jack to step outside of his own identity. He is both fascinated and empowered by this awesome stranger staring back. Golding writes that upon donning the mask, putting the mask on, Jack began to dance, and his laughter became a bloodthirsty snarling. His joy turns into a snarl. The mask has unlocked something feral, primitive, atavistic within him. The language here is making clear Jack is now more like a predatory animal in sound and action. Other boys are drawn in and, at the same time, terrified by this change. The mask has a contagious social power. Golding pointedly observes the mask was a thing on its own, behind which Jack hid, liberated from shame and self-consciousness. This is one of the most significant lines in the book. The mask frees Jack from shame and self-consciousness. He no longer feels the guilt or modesty, those inhibitions imposed by society. Painted, he is anonymous and therefore unaccountable for his actions. Behind the mask, Jack can now fully embrace savagery without remorse or the constraints of his prior identity. Golding implies that concealed identity breeds cruelty, a theme with very, very broad implications. One might think of uniforms or face paint in real-world conflicts that somehow enable atrocities. For Jack, the clay mask is a gateway to utter barbarism. Immediately after this, Jack and his hunters successfully kill a pig, chanting and exulting in blood. The mask scene thus encapsulates Jack's point of no return. He has shed the last inhibitions of civilized behavior. By losing himself, he finds the savage freedom to do anything. This moment also cements Jack's leadership over the other hunters. His frightening, awesome painted persona inspires them to follow him with a new fervor. In sum, Chapter 4 uses the motif of the mask to illustrate the loss of personal identity and morality that paradoxically reveals and allows Jack's inner savage to dominate. And Chapter 5, everyone's favourite quotation: "Bollocks to the rules, breaking from civilization." As Jack's savagery grows, so too does his contempt for the order that Ralph tries to maintain. In Chapter 5, during a tense assembly about the so-called beast, Jack openly defies Ralph's authority. When Ralph and Piggy insist on the importance of the signal fire in the conch rules, Jack explodes. "Bollocks to the rules! We're strong, we hunt!" This outburst is another dramatic turning point in the power dynamic. Jack here rejects the very rules he had once agreed to, using, of course, the coarse expletive, bollocks, to show complete disrespect for the civilization symbolized by the conch. His priorities are clear. Strength and hunting should trump meetings and rules. Jack even goes on to shout that if there is a beast, we'll hunt it down, we'll close in and beat and beat and beat, demonstrating his belief that violence is apparently the answer to every problem. In this moment, Jack positions himself as the antithesis of Ralph. Where Ralph's power comes from the conch, and therefore democratic order, Jack's power comes from the spear, force and fear. "We're strong, we hunt" becomes Jack's motto. He appeals to the boys' fear of the beast, but also their lust for adventure and violence, suggesting that under his leadership, they can do something, not just talk. The allure of Jack's stance is that it offers a sense of empowerment. The boys can assert dominance over their fear by hunting it. However, the cost is the abandonment of civilized restraints, golden rights. The world, that understandable and lawful world, was slipping away. It underscores that with Jack's revolt, fragile order is disintegrating. Many of the boys join Jack's chaotic excitement here, dancing, chanting, as the assembly breaks apart in terror and enthusiasm. This foreshadows the eventual splintering of the group. After this confrontation, Jack's breakaway tribe seems virtually inevitable. Golding uses Jack's line, "Bollocks to the rules," to signal that barbarism is overtaking the last vestiges of law. Jack has thrown off pretense. He now no longer even pretends to respect the conch or the idea of civilized conversation and discourse. From now on, might makes right in Jack's view. This sets the stage for open rebellion and the formation of Jack's tribe later in the book. We're going to skip ahead a little bit now to Chapter 8, and we're going to skip ahead specifically to the idea of a gift for the darkness. By this point, Jack has fully split from Ralph and established his own tribe at the other end of the island. Here, we see Jack at his most brutally efficient and ritualistic. He engineers the gruesome killing of the sow, the mother pig, an act Golding describes in vivid, gory, sexualized detail to emphasize the depravity the boys have sunk into. After the kill, with the boys heavy and fulfilled upon the sow, Jack's hunters are gleeful. Jack is himself blood-spattered, but he's focused. Notably, as Jack begins to butcher the sow, the narrative says he talked as he worked. This casual phrase, "talked as he worked," highlights how ordinary violence has become for Jack. Think about the contrast between this quotation and the inability to kill the piglet at the end of Chapter 1, the enormity, the downward stroke. the unbearable blood and so on. Not so unbearable now. We might use the word habituated. Talked as he worked highlights how habituated Jack has become to violence and butchery. He chats and plans in a matter-of-fact tone while bending over the sow's carcass, lugging out the hot bags of guts. The boy, who could once never not even bear the sight of blood, now handles entrails without flinching. Jack issues orders in this scene like a commander. He organizes a raid to steal fire from Ralph's camp, and he announces a feast. The content of his speech is telling. He doesn't mention rescue at all, just feasting and raiding, the priorities of a warlord rather than a castaway hoping for rescue and salvation. But importantly, Jack also devises a primitive ritual. After cutting off the sow's head, Jack decides to leave it as an offering to the imagined beast. Sharpen a stick at both ends, he instructs Roger. This terse command encapsulates how far Jack's savagery has evolved. A stick sharpened at both ends is meant, of course, to impale the pig's head on one end and the stake in the other end in the ground. It's a gruesome totem. The resulting image, the Lord of the Flies, that is, the fly-covered pig's head, is a literal gift to the beast. Jack's idea to perform a blood sacrifice indicates a regression to primitive superstition and brutality. He is effectively instituting a cult of the beast, using fear of this unknown monster to justify violence and consolidate his power. This act also foreshadows Jack's threat to Ralph's life. Later, it is revealed that Jack plans to sharpen a stick at both ends for Ralph's head, implying that he will hunt Ralph like a pig. In the sow-killing scene, Jack's leadership has taken on the qualities of a sadistic tyrant. After mounting the pig's head, Jack excitedly vows to steal fire and invite even Ralph's group to join a feast, using meat and the illusion of security from the beast as bait for allegiance. We see that Jack now wields both terror and nourishment as tools of control. He creates fear of the beast and provides a solution, a feast and protection through strength. This is power politics in its rawest form, and Jack is a master of it. By chapter 8, Golding has transformed Jack into the archetype of a dictator, complete with ritualized violence and propaganda. The boys' participation in the frenzied slaughter of the sow, laughing and reenacting it, demonstrates how Jack's influence has made savage cruelty normal. The gift of the pig's head to their beast symbolizes the boys' total surrender to barbarism under Jack's rule. And now, chapter 9, A View to a Death. In this chapter, Jack reaches the zenith, the pinnacle of his power, during a feast. Golding presents a disturbing scene of almost pagan-like revelry. Jack sits on a great log like a throne, painted and garlanded, sat there like an idol. And that word-level analysis, idol, is crucial. Jack is being worshipped now by the other boys. They've adorned their chief with paint and a garland, maybe of vines and flowers, as one would dress a statue of a god. Food is piled around him as offerings, piles of meat on green leaves near him and fruit and coconut shells full of drink. This imagery shows how Jack's leadership has become almost religious in nature. He commands obedience not by democratic consent, but through awe and fear. The boys laugh, dance, and sing in his presence, having fully accepted the tribal ritual over Ralph's rather sober and, let's be honest, quite tedious assemblies. By portraying Jack as an idol, Golding suggests that the boys have elevated him to a supreme authority, one that goes unquestioned and is fed by their primal desires. Jack's behaviour in this scene cements his role as a totalitarian figure. He issues commands, take them some meat, he says, ensuring even Ralph and Piggy are fed. But he questions the group like a lord, presiding over his vassals. Has everybody eaten as much as they want? He seems magnanimous but in absolute control. The feast atmosphere, however, soon gives way. What does it give way to? It turns dark when the boys, led by Jack's frenzied energy, perform a wild dance in a thunderstorm, during which Simon is tragically killed by the mob. Now, though Jack isn't named as the one who individually strikes the blow, it is his cult-like leadership that incited the dance and his earlier establishment of the beast myth that created the climate of terror. After Simon's death, Jack uses the boys' fear to strengthen his idol status. He claims Simon was the beast in disguise and that the beast is still alive, immortal. It must be appeased, further entrenching the irrational rule of fear. By the end of chapter 9, all the boys, with the exception of Ralph, Piggy, and the twins, have sworn allegiance to Jack. The painted idol on the log has won. This chapter demonstrates how Jack's thirst for power culminates in religious-like devotion and moral collapse. The civilized boundaries of right and wrong have been erased under the force of groupthink and Jack's charismatic savagery. Golding's message is clear. He's making a broader point about how charismatic authoritarianism can rise. Jack offers meat, protection, and a strange sense of belonging through rituals, tangible things in an otherwise frightening environment, whereas Ralph offers tedious, abstract principles like rescue and rules. Thus, the boys, scared and hungry, idolize Jack. That phrase, painted and garlanded like an idol, captures the paradox of Ralph's character. He has become both a primitive savage and a godlike leader. In Golding's allegory, this reflects how violent dictators can assume an aura of godlike power among followers, even as they champion humanity's basest impulses. And so, to chapter 12. In the final chapter, the carefully constructed savage world that Jack dominated comes crashing down with the arrival of a naval officer. In the climax, Jack has been hunting Ralph, intending to kill him, the ultimate triumph of savagery over civilization. Yet, at the moment of highest tension, an adult somewhat miraculously appears, responding to the smoke of the wildfire, the fire they've caused. This sudden return of external authority has a very profound effect. Golding writes that when the officer asks who's in charge, it's Ralph who identifies himself as leader. Jack, who a moment before was a ferocious hunter in war paint, is now described as a little boy who wore the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair and who carried the remains of a pair of spectacles at his waist. At the question of authority, Jack started forward, then changed his mind and stood still. In this description, Golding deliberately strips Jack of his savage titles and paints him, again, as just a little boy. The war paint is smudged, the remains of his black cap and the fact that his face paint would be running or faded, and he still has Piggy's broken glasses slung at his waist, a rather poignant reminder of the crime he committed to obtain power. The mighty chief is instantly reduced to a child in the presence of the naval officer, that symbol of adult authority and civilization. Jack's impulse is to assert himself. He starts forward as if to say, "I'm chief," but he halts, confronted with a grown-up, armed only with a broken stick and the tatters of his former uniform. Jack cannot continue this charade of power. This moment is both revealing and tragic. It's revealing because it halts the violence. It's tragic because it underscores how thin the veneer of Jack's savagery was. Beneath all of that aggression, Jack is still a child. And now that truth reasserts itself with embarrassing clarity, the naval officer, in a scolding, rather puzzled tone, remarks that he expected better from a pack of British boys, evoking again the ironic contrast between who the boys were supposed to be and what they became. Ralph breaks down sobbing, and soon the other little boys shake and sob too, Jack apparently among them. In the end, Golding's use of little boys reminds the reader that these savages were children, a fact we, like the officer, may well have forgotten during the height of the island's horror and terror. For Jack's character, this final scene drives home the allegorical message. Jack embodied savagery and the lust for power, which for a time transformed him into something larger than life, a feared chief and idol with the semblance of a beast. But with the reappearance of, perhaps, civilization, Jack's power dissolves instantly. He has no real authority in the face of the naval commander. All his painted savagery was a nightmare fantasy that cannot stand before the real structures of the civilized world. Maybe the civilized world. Jack saying nothing in this scene is significant. It's the only time we really see him speechless. It suggests, perhaps, a buried shame or the shock of reality. In the blink of an eye, he's a red-haired schoolboy all over again, in torn clothes, not a bloodthirsty hunter. Golding thus ends Jack's arc with a recontextualization of his savagery. What seemed so powerful and absolute is revealed as pathetic and fragile from a different perspective. This is a rather strong comment on human nature. Our savage tendencies can consume us in certain conditions, but they aren't beyond control. Jack's fall in the end also spares him from yet more moral degradation. Had he killed Ralph, his redemption to childhood innocence might be absolutely impossible. Instead, we're left with an image of children in tears, Jack included mourning the end of innocence and the darkness of man's heart, as Ralph weeps for their collective grief and loss. So, Jack's trajectory, his arc, in Lord of the Flies, is a powerful exploration of how the veneer of civilization can crumble, turning a schoolboy into a savage ruler. Across the book, Golding charts Jack's degeneration step by step, from the arrogant choir leader who craves power, to the obsessed hunter driven by bloodlust, to the painted chief who exploits fear to dominate others, and finally, to a humbled little boy confronted with the reality of his actions. Through each key moment, his arrogant claim to authority, his first hesitation to kill, his embrace of hunting and the hunting compulsion, the liberation of the mask, the rejection of rules, the ritual of the kill, and the worship as an idol, Golding illustrates different facets of our capacity for evil, chaos, and disorder. Jack represents the savage impulse that lies in all people, the impulse to prioritize power and desire over empathy and law. In the microcosm of the island, his rise to power results in chaos, violence, and the death of innocence, the deaths of Simon, the deaths of Piggy, and the attempted murder of Ralph. Golding, having lived through the atrocities of the Second World War, suggests that the darkness of man's heart is an ever-present part of our nature. Jack, then, is the novel's primary vehicle for that idea. He's not a one-dimensional villain, but rather a frighteningly believable portrait of a boy sliding into barbarism. What makes Jack's story especially compelling and unsettling is that his descent is not caused by supernatural influence or madness. It's a result of choices, circumstances, the seductive nature of power itself. Given license by the absence of adult authority, Jack, step by step, removes the checks on his darker instincts. Each rule shrugged off, each kill, each act of intimidation, making it easier for him to go further the next time. Next time, there would be no mercy. Golding is suggesting that civilization is a gossamer thin barrier. Once broken, the primal self can emerge with shocking speed. And so, ultimately, Golding's portrayal of Jack reinforces the novel's key central theme: the defect or flaw of society itself stems from our flawed human nature. And in Jack Merridew, we see that flaw, the lust for power, the thrill of dominance, slide into savagery in its most potent form, as well as the sobering realization of that defect when civilization sometimes finally intervenes.